Hey everyone, I hope you're having a fantastic day. I've got another industry update for you, and this is one that's come across my desk quite a handful of times. So if you're thinking to yourself, man, did he send this out because of me and my transaction? The answer may be yes. And I want you to know you're not alone. It's important to understand that when I bring these topics up, it's because we're seeing it and other people need to see it now. So the one we're going to talk about today are HOA contribution fees. We've seen this happen quite a few times, particularly in the last few months because of some of the changes on the contract. And as you start to see the demographic as it relates to time and neighborhoods of sellers that are now selling their homes. So, where does this show up in the contract? As always, we're going to jump to the contract to see where it is. I'm going to jump to page 3 of the South Carolina contract, which talks specifically about transaction costs. And in section A of section 6, and then subsection 3 on page 3, we have what will be whose responsibility. It says the following costs will be considered either the seller or the buyer's transaction costs. Now, as you see here, if you do not check one of those, it's going to default to the seller. Yeah. We understand this, Joseph. Why are we talking about this? Because here's where we're getting tricked a little bit. And not tricked, that's not the good way to put it, is part 3 of this subsection. It does name fees, transfer fees, either a certificate of assessment, capital contributions, working capital, estoppel fees, or otherwise named but similar fees, which basically opens it up to a lot. And where we're seeing this show up is in twofold. Is the sellers are being surprised at closing because they were not aware that when they agreed to cover these, what all it included. Some of you are saying, I don't know how that would be possible. And explain it to my seller till they're blue in the face. Doesn't matter. The seller, you have to understand when you're putting paperwork in front of them, it's the first time they're seeing it. They're seeing it while they're negotiations. Emotions are high. So it is our responsibility to make sure that we're explaining this process properly to them so they have the best experience ever and that you're protecting them. So in this certain section, it shows up in 2 ways of why the sellers are surprised. Number one is, first of all, they all of a sudden are covering a contribution fee that they didn't realize they were signing for, yet they paid one when they moved in. The reason they didn't even think about whether or not this was part, and so a lot of people say it's clearly mapped out in there. A lot of these sellers, when they purchased their home, it was a different contract. And that contract did not specify capital contribution fees. And naturally, one would understand or assume that because you're paying to contribute to the capital of the HOA in which you're going to live, that would be the buyer's responsibility. It is now mapped out specifically who it is. So that's the first time that it shows up, is they just did not understand it, even though you may have explained it. So when you're going through this, you want to make sure, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, wants you to understand that this does include the capital contribution fee. Does your neighborhood have one? Well, yeah, it does. I paid it when I moved in. Okay, so are you willing to pay it for the buyer? No, that doesn't make sense. Awesome. Here's an area we will counter. So that's the first part to explain it. Now, as always, the best time to explain it is as early in the process as possible, which we'll come back to here in a second. Second time this is showing up is for sellers that live in a neighborhood that did not have a capital contribution fee when they moved into it. So they see this and they're like, no big deal, right? So again, same thing applies when they're negotiating a contract. This is assuming I'm talking only now about sellers you already have. We're going to talk in a second about how to get ahead of it. When you are negotiating a contract, you want to make sure you explain to the sellers, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, this is going to cover what's called a capital contribution fee. It's a percentage of the sales price, which the HOA collects at closing to go to the working capital or a welcome to the neighborhood fee. Does your neighborhood have one? Oh, no, they don't. Are you sure? No, they didn't have one when I purchased in here. My recommendation to you is that we double check with your HOA, because I've had this happen before. 2 meetings prior to them getting a contract, these people lived in the neighborhood for 20 years. They were not involved in the HOA. They did not care. And an HOA or capital contribution fee was actually put into play. Sellers had no idea. They ended up having to pay it at closing. So you want to make sure you facilitate the conversation between the seller and their HOA to understand that. Now, it is always great to also address this ahead of time. Let's address this for those of you who are looking and going on listings right now and going on listing appointments and taking listings. The best place to address this is going to be while you're going through your listing presentation and you're explaining to them their listing agreement. If you look at the bottom of page 3, it talks about the owner's duties. And in this first section here, A, it says to furnish the broker with complete and reliable information concerning ownership and the operation of the property and any encumbrances or liens affecting the property. Now, I'm not arguing the details of whether or not this is an encumbrance or a lien, but it is part of the operation of owning the home. So at this point, this would be a good point for you to say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, as we get your home ready to list on the market, one of the things that I would love for you to do is to confirm with your HOA if and how much the capital contribution fee is. Obviously, some of you have listings now, you're thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, I didn't do that. Go do that. You've probably got to check in with your seller anyway. So call them. Hey, how's it going? We had X showings this weekend. Also, one of the things I want to make sure that we do is so when we get a contract, we're not surprised. Go check with your HOA, see if there are any capital contribution fees. Again, none of this is irreparable. We can always fix this. We can always come to a compromise, but let's not let this happen for our clients at the closing table. So, the moral of the story is, does the HOA have a contribution fee? Has the seller, not you, the seller confirmed with the HOA what it is, or if there is one and how much it is? And does everyone know? So when you get in negotiations, they have the best information possible. As always, call me, email me with any questions. Hope you're having a great day. Happy selling.